ever feel like you're kind of battling with, yourself? Like that feeling of wanting stuff you can't have or being frustrated because you're not where you thought you'd be.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty universal struggle. But today we're going to dive deep into this whole thing, and we're going to use a pretty unexpected source, the book of James, chapter 4 specifically.
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
It might seem a little, I don't know, random to use the Bible for something like this, but trust me, this section really gets into the nitty-gritty of where conflict comes from, and even more importantly, kind of points us towards a better way of living.
I like that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So what's interesting is how James connects our inner world, thoughts and feelings and all that, to how we interact with other people and the world around us.
He doesn't hold back either. He really digs into the messy reality of human emotions and how all that internal stuff can actually lead us into conflict with others.
Totally. Like he just comes right out and says, where do conflicts and quarrels among you come from? Is it not from your desires that battle within you? And then he goes on, you desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. That's pretty intense, right?
Definitely. It's a pretty stark picture he's painting.
It is. And it's so relatable. Like I think about how often I catch myself scrolling through social media and feeling that pang of, I don't know, envy, like seeing those perfect vacations, the amazing careers, all that. And it's easy to fall into that trap of wanting what they have and even feeling like resentful when my own life doesn't measure up.
Oh, yeah. That's such a classic example of what James is getting at. It's like those desires, those little bits of envy and comparison, they kind of build up inside us and then boom, we're way more likely to lash out or just get into it with someone over the smallest thing.
It's almost like a pressure cooker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all that pressure is building up internally and all it takes is one little thing to make it explode outward.
100%. And James doesn't stop there. He even goes a step further and connects this whole internal struggle to our relationship with, I guess you could say, the world. He talks about friendship with the world, meaning hostility toward God.
Yeah, that one always kind of threw me off.
Yeah?
Like we literally live in the world,
Yeah.
So how can we not be friends with it in some way?
Yeah, good point. I think what he's saying is it's less about physically separating ourselves from the world, like becoming a hermit or something.
Right.
It's more about what really matters to us. What do we prioritize in our lives? Are we chasing after all those temporary things the world kind of throws at us, like money and status and stuff?
Yeah. Or are we trying to go for something deeper and more meaningful?
Exactly. And I think James is warning us that if we get too caught up in those fleeting things, the things that don't really last, we can actually end up feeling disconnected from something bigger than ourselves.
It's like, I don't know, imagine you're building a house. Are you going to spend all your time and energy on decorating the outside, or are you going to make sure the foundation is solid? You can't really do both, right?
Great analogy. You got to pick what matters most. And that's where James brings in this concept of humility, which he sees as the antidote to all this internal struggle.
Right. He says that God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble.
Exactly. And I think it's important to understand what he means by humility here, because it's not about, putting ourselves down or acting like we're worthless or anything.
So it's not about becoming a doormat.
Not at all. It's about, I think, having a realistic perspective on ourselves, understanding both our strengths and our weaknesses and recognizing that we don't have it all figured out.
Oh, okay. So it's more about understanding our place in the world, recognizing that we have limits, and maybe needing something beyond ourselves to really be complete.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's funny because when you start to think about it, humility is actually really closely tied to those worldly desires we were talking about earlier. If we're constantly caught up in pride and comparing ourselves to everyone else, we're never going to be truly content, are we?
Right. It's like a never-ending cycle.
Totally. And that's why humility is so important. It helps us take a step back, reevaluate what really matters, and, kind of detach from all those things that are ultimately just going to leave us empty.
Okay, I get that. But if humility is the key here, how do we actually put it into practice? Does James give us any, practical steps we can take?
He does. He lays out a pretty clear action plan, actually. He says we need to submit ourselves to God, resist temptation, draw near to God, cleanse our hands and purify our hearts, grieve and mourn over our sins, and humble ourselves before the Lord.
Wow, that's a lot. It sounds really intense.
It does, yeah. But I think the core of what he's saying is about aligning our lives with a different set of values. It's about shifting our focus from ourselves to something bigger.
Okay, so I'm thinking submitting to God doesn't have to be this big dramatic thing. It could be as simple as taking a few minutes each day to just be still and reflect, to quiet our minds and maybe be open to something beyond our own understanding.
Totally. And resisting temptation could be like choosing to put down our phone and connect with the people around us instead of getting sucked into the endless scroll of social media. It's about those small everyday choices that really show what we value.
Right, right. And then James, he's on a roll here, and he hits us with another powerful statement. He says, "Don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. Who are you to judge your neighbor?" It's like he's calling out this hypocrisy of judging other people when we're all imperfect,
I think so too. It's like a gut check moment, and it makes you realize that judging others is actually a pretty sneaky form of pride, isn't it? It's like we're trying to make ourselves feel better by putting other people down.
Yeah, it's so true. And we forget that everyone is fighting their own battles, dealing with their own temptations and struggles.
Exactly. And that's where true humility comes in. It's recognizing that we're all flawed, we all need grace, and then offering that same grace to the people around us.
Yeah, that's powerful. And then almost as if he wanted to, really drive this point home about humility, James reminds us of something we often try not to think about, which is how fragile life really is.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life?
Yeah.
You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. I remember when my grandmother died completely out of the blue, and it just hit me how quickly things can change, how little control we actually have.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder for sure. It makes you realize how pointless it is to boast about our plans or get too attached to our ambitions and all that, especially when you consider how short life really is.
And in a way, recognizing that we're not going to be here forever can actually be incredibly freeing.
Totally. It can help us let go of the need to control everything, focus on what really matters, and maybe even open ourselves up to connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And what I think is so cool about all this is that James isn't just throwing around a bunch of abstract ideas. He's actually giving us this really practical roadmap to live a better, more fulfilling life.
Yeah, it's like a journey of self-awareness, surrender, and ultimately transformation.
I love that.
Me too. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into James 4. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thought from James to, kind of chew on. He says, "Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." So think about that for a second. What good do you know you should be doing but haven't gotten around to yet? What's holding you back?
That's a great question to ponder.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been great having this conversation with you.
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy these conversations.